Hello, my wonderful friend. You have logged on to Renegade Files, your underground connection to paranormal tales, unsolved mysteries, and conspiracy research deep dives. You are now in the company of outcasts. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, updating this unauthorized transmission from the Jungle Villa outpost deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files, episode 88, The Collins Elite, Demonic Aliens, and Deep State Spiritual War. Imagine assembling a team of investigative spies, whose members are a mixture of Catholic exorcists, UFOlogists, and deep state intelligence agents, who study black magic witches and alien abductees, and then assigning them the mission of identifying and resolving the source of the perennial UFO and alien phenomenon. While this sounds like the premise of a late-night horror movie, it could be more fact than fiction. On this ad-free episode, we will explore an unsettling convergence of occult research, the deep state, and a spiritual war for human souls as we learn about the Collins Elite, a shadowy group whose eclectic members came to believe that UFOs and aliens might just be far more bizarre and sinister than we have ever imagined. If you are ready for a deep and twisted ride into one of the weirdest and most mind-boggling episodes ever, then you're in luck. Now, parts of this are non-linear, and the threads tend to be fragmented, but there is a whole to be revealed here. It's theoretical and crazy, but fascinating. If that sounds fun, then follow me now, if you dare, into Renegade Files episode 88, The Collins Elite, Demonic Aliens, and Deep State Spiritual War. Demonic Aliens and Deep State Spiritual War. Demonic Aliens and Deep State Spiritual War. Demonic Aliens and Deep State Spiritual War. All right. Before we get into this, I want to let you know that if my voice sounds a little weird, it's because I'm on day 4 of a terrible cold that I've got. These things are the worst. I guess they make us appreciate the days that we don't have a cold, but as you know, they suck. And it's part of the reason that this show has been delayed for a little longer than I would have liked. Wanted to put it out on the 11th for you, but all we can do is move forward. Persistence, right? And recording this is not going to be easy because I'm sneezing, coughing, and my voice is weak, but I'm going to do it for you because you make the show work and you deserve an episode. So here it is. Part 1. Final events. So this theory comes to us in large part through the work of Nick Redfern and his book Final Events. In this book, he cites first-hand sources who say they have been personally involved with a military and intelligence operation that Redfern tells us is internally referred to as the Collins Elite. I've been a fan of Nick Redfern for some time. One of the reasons I like him is because he usually presents facts and straight information, even on the wildest subjects. He's objective and thorough. He doesn't go off on wild speculations. And he doesn't report made-up stories as factual, which is why I was so interested when I found out that this book dives into such a strange subject. So let's go over a quick summary of what his book proposes. Redfern explores the controversial idea that this secret U.S. government group believes that UFOs and alien encounters may actually be manifestations of demonic entities. He tells us that this group believes that these entities are manipulating human perceptions to create a false narrative about extraterrestrial life. Overall, the author here is giving us these details based on interviews he's conducted rather than his own opinions, which is always a good thing. The book suggests that the goal of these entities is to promote a belief in extraterrestrial life, which could lead to widespread panic and spiritual confusion. The narrative relies heavily on secret informants and documents, and Redfern acknowledges the speculative nature of the information, but he presents it as a serious investigation into a hidden aspect of the UFO phenomenon. The book, Final Events, challenges conventional views on UFOs, proposing a darker interpretation that intertwines the paranormal with government secrecy. It invites readers to reconsider the implications of alien encounters and their potential ties to spiritual beliefs. The book opens with the description of Ray Boesch, who was an Anglican priest, the founder of the Fortean Research Center, and a former Nebraska State Director of MUFON. He was somehow recruited by the Department of Defense, and a DoD physicist in a clandestine meeting explained to him what they believed to be the dark and disturbing truth at the heart of the UFO mystery. Boesch had been contacted at his work, and he never found out why the DoD had chosen him, but through a series of classified projects, secret meetings, and disturbing accounts, he learned that elements within the deep state believe UFOs and aliens to be nothing less than deceptive, demonic beings from the spirit world. I want to read a little bit from Nick's book so we can get a feeling for the way he's presenting things here. And when this passage uses the word they, it's referring to the Collins Elite Group, which is the name given for this secret group of the informants. And when he mentions NHEs, that refers to non-human entities. Okay, so let's read. They came to believe that the NHEs were not extraterrestrial at all. They believed they were some sort of demonic entities, and that regardless of how benevolent or beneficial any of the contact they had with these entities seemed to be, it always ended up being tainted, for lack of a better term, with something that ultimately turned out to be bad. There was ultimately nothing positive from the interaction with the NHEs. They felt it really fell more under the category of some vast spiritual deception instead of UFOs and aliens. In the course of the whole discussion, it was clear that they really viewed this as having a demonic origin, that there was simply these things to try and confuse the issue in terms of who they were, what they wanted, and what the source of the ultimate truth is. If you extrapolate from their take that these are demons in the biblical sense of the word, then what they would be doing here is trying to create a spiritual deception to fool as many people as possible. They were concerned that they had undertaken this initially with the best of intentions, but then, as things developed, they saw a very negative side to it that wasn't apparent earlier. So that's what leads me to think they had a relatively lengthy involvement. The story became even more complex when the reasoning behind and the goals of the project were revealed. Most of it was related to psychotronic weaponry and remote viewing, and even deaths, and what were supposed to be psychic methods. Certainly, the NHEs, it was deduced by those attached to the DoD project, possessed extraordinary and lethal mental powers. And as a result, deeper plans were initiated using nothing less than ancient rites and black rituals to actually try to contact the NHEs with two specific, some might say utterly crackpot, goals in mind. One, controlling them, and two, exploiting their extraordinary mental powers in the form of devastating weaponry. So that's it from the book for now. This isn't a review of the book, but rather an exploration of these theories it puts forth. The rest of this episode pulls stories and case studies from the book, but also from other sources, and the goal is to get a cohesive picture of this most amazing hypothesis. Alright, before we move further into this, there's just a few things I want to point out from those passages in the book, okay? One of them is that the Collins elite says that in the interactions that they or some members of the DoD had with these NHEs or non-human intelligences is that they always start out good and they seem like everything is fine and that they have the best of intentions, but then as it evolves, they reveal a deeper, darker, more sinister nature. Something always bad happens or comes from it. Okay, this reminds me of something that I've heard the guys on, the last podcast on the left, and I think maybe Marcus, who always says about aliens, they always lie, right? Now, he's somebody that studied aliens a lot. It's kind of his hobby. It's his wheelhouse, as they say these days. And, you know, he'll always point out that's something you have to worry about, and it's something you have to remember about these aliens. They always lie. Right? So that's on the last podcast on the left, their opinion. And, you know, those guys are cool. They're entertaining. So the rest of this gets really weird. Okay? So buckle up. And before, once again, one more aside before we go into it, doesn't it sound exactly like big government bureaucrats, something they would do? Oh, we contacted these sort of interdimensional aliens that always bring a dark, sinister sort of game to the table. What should we do about it? Let's try to get in touch again so we can control them and exploit their technology to create a weapon to use on our own fellow human beings. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay? All right. So anyway, as I said, this gets crazy. Buckle up. So in addition to the idea that the deep state wanted to use what they could learn from these non-human entities as part of their psychic weaponry arsenal, we also learned that the men involved in this program came to believe that these demonic entities were consciously attempting to deceive the people into believing that these experiences were the result of earthly contact with extraterrestrial beings, so aliens. So that was a sort of conscious effort by them. It delineates the idea from this notion that we interpreted it as aliens because of our nature, but that they're sort of actively trying to trick us into believing that in whatever ways. This is a very esoteric take on an already esoteric subject, that being this idea that all of us in the ufology community have actually been deceived by interdimensional demons and tricked into believing that these demons are aliens from outer space. This also casts the ideas of the ancient aliens crowd into a new light, because one of their main theories is that the writers of many ancient spiritual texts were simply misinterpreting what they saw and calling extraterrestrials angels and demons. The Collins elite, as reported in Nick Redfern's book, actually believed the opposite, that what we call UFOs and extraterrestrials are actually demons or fallen angels. It's fascinating. So the Collins elite is a loosely formed collective of scientists and clergymen, as well as a few occult experts, and they get teamed up with some government spooks and set out to solve the UFO and alien mystery once and for all. These guys are like a spiritual Project Blue Book. One of the initial people of interest to the group was a man named Paul Garrett. He had some sort of near-death experience, and in it, he described small beings attempting to extract his soul. he was able to get away from the immediate threat somehow, and as he did, but before he came back to his physical form, he realized that on this astral plane, there were countless UFOs, what he described as silver balls of light. But he didn't think they were metal spacecraft, but rather UFOs made of living beings. This reminds me of some of the descriptions from Bob Lazar. Not that he said the crafts were living beings, but he did describe some of the propulsion and control systems of the crafts as having some kind of biological interface, where he believed that the alien gray piloting the crafts would somehow operate the ship through thoughts and feelings, rather than knobs and levers. This explains the sleek, featureless surfaces of the craft interiors we hear about. Also, I think when Lazar touched the outside of one of the crafts, he felt a living, organic response, much like you might feel if you closed your eyes and brushed your hand along the side of a horse. I think that was Lazar. To dive deep into his story, you can listen to one of our most replayed episodes ever, Renegade Files episode 26, Bob Lazar, UFO mechanic or disinformation agent. So according to Paul Garrett, who was the subject investigated by the Collins elite, these ships that he saw in his vision were alive. He saw that they were traversing the physical realm and extracting the souls of individuals at an alarming rate and pace. Thousands of these living biological spacecraft hovering over Earth and harvesting souls from the population. This description led the researchers to begin looking into the possibility of a spiritual motivation behind the alien abduction phenomenon. And what they concluded was that what we are dealing with is not some off-world physical intelligence, but interdimensional beings that are akin to demonic hunters. They are harvesting souls and the higher energies of the human consciousness through the facade of alien abductions. These are what researcher Nathaniel J. Gillis calls soul hunters. He has a great video on the Collins Elite, and I'll link to that in the Dark Intel files for this episode at the Renegade Files Agency page on Patreon, so you can find it there. So after studying the near-death experience of Paul Garrett, these members of the Collins Elite, some of whom had religious backgrounds, came to this conclusion that what Garrett was describing was some sort of parasitic soul harvester. They realized that this has been described over the years by other experiencers as an alien presence, because that's just the form that our modern sensibilities assign to something so foreign. But these researchers believed that these beings were actually functioning in the same space as the consciousness when it has this near-death experience. And that they're putting the idea that they're aliens into our mind at that time. This is the space your consciousness inhabits when it becomes disembodied. So when you dream. So whether you call that the ether, whether you call it heaven or the spiritual realm or the energetic field, it really doesn't matter. What they're saying is that these are parasitic, predatory, energy beings that are harvesting emotions and souls from these abduction experiencers. The Collins Elite researchers referred to these entities as demons, and this has caused many people to suggest what these men were doing was projecting their own preconceived religious beliefs onto these unexplained spiritual experiences. So this is a theme that runs through this whole episode, this back and forth idea of projection or implanting ideas. It could be one, it could be the other, a combination of both. Gillis argues that this is not the case, because these interdimensional soul harvesting beings, which the Collins Elite members referred to as demons or demonic, have nothing to do with the traditional evangelical or fundamentalist Christian versions of what those frameworks would call demons or demonic. So these descriptions by the Collins researchers almost create a new genre of demon, so to speak. Something that lives outside of our traditional religious descriptions, but underneath our modern technological ideas of extraterrestrials or aliens. Some kind of interdimensional energy vampire. Another point that Redfern makes is that the Department of Defense's casual and almost reckless dabbling in the dark arts of occult magic and ritual in a haphazard attempt to control and manipulate both these demonic entities and the powers they seem to have has made things exponentially worse, not only for the Department of Defense, but for all of the rest of us living in this timeline. So, thanks a lot. Nathaniel J. Gillis, who I've mentioned a few times so far, also points out something very interesting, which is that in his research and interviews with about 30 abductees, he has found that many of them have very negative experiences. This kind of soul-damaging abduction phenomenon. And Gillis says that, at least among the people he's talked to, that these negative types of abduction stories are often ignored by the alternative media and the alternative press. So those who relay this soul-stealing scenario can't get interviews or books, and they don't get published and all of that. This is fascinating, partly because it aligns with something we discovered when doing the multiple personality episode, and that was that the modern TikTok influencers who have become strong voices, for good or bad, among the dissociative personality disorder crowd on TikTok tend to shy away from reporting their negative experiences with the disorder because the TikTok algorithm favors the cheerful, everything is cool take on living with MPD. You can dive deep into that subject on Renegade Files episode 76, Multiple Personality Disorder, the extreme controversies of dissociation psychopathology. So I wonder if we're seeing a similar situation at work with what Gillis calls the soul hunter aspect of what we commonly think of as extraterrestrial abductions, but what may be, according to the Collins elite theory, some spiritual level of demonic activity. And is this situation here something that parallels this sort of active censorship mechanism that we find in the multiple personality content on TikTok, where the negative, soul-destroying abduction experiences are being marginalized because of some tech component that views these types of stories as less marketable than your common, everyday, nuts and bolts little gray aliens abducted the human to experiment physically on them type of a thing? I don't know. Neither of those sound too positive, and this is just my idea, so I'm not sure if there's a lot of merit to it, but it's interesting nonetheless. Because unlike the MPD situation, where TikTok videos on that subject are more likely to go viral if they're positive and happy, I really don't think that it's the positive, happy version of alien abductions that gain a lot of traction either. I don't know. I think more of what's going on here, if it's similar, is that people in the alternative culture space aren't automatically keen on the idea that one of our favorite subject groups, that is extraterrestrials and UFOs, is actually some kind of biblical, demonic, spiritual war thing. We like our UFOs, we like our aliens, and we like our ghosts, but we don't like our peas to touch our carrots. But according to the Collins elite, this is precisely what's going on. So as the Collins elite dove into trying to figure all of this out, they arrived at the workings of a few very nefarious characters, those being the likes of Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley, both of whom were fascinated by eschatology, which is the study of the end-time prophecies and events. Now, there are a few things that happened to lead the Collins group in this direction, and I guess we can call this Part 2, Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley join the chat. So in December of 1916, Crowley was in New Orleans. He spent February of the next year in Titusville, Florida, of all places, with relatives, and from there, he went to New York City, where he met up with fellow occultist Roddy Minor. And while under the influence of vast amounts of hash and opium, they performed a sex magic ritual called the Alamantra working, which resulted in, according to them, the conjuring of an interdimensional being who came through a portal they opened up and told them his name was Lam. L-A-M. It seems that Crowley opened a portal between the stars, and this portal was never closed again. So through that, Lam and others like him have entered our known physical universe. Thanks a lot, Crowley. These interdimensional beings, Crowley unleashed, are responsible for all of the alien abductions and sightings since then. And because they are lost from their world, they must feed on the souls and energies, such as fear and excitement generated by humans. So we have the abduction phenomenon. This, according to author Lux Ferrer from the Occult World Library. Crowley drew sketches of this being, and he looks almost exactly like what we would today call an alien gray. The classic big-headed, black-eyed alien of pop culture. Our alien friend. This excursion into the hijinks of Crowley led the Collins elite crew to Jack Parsons, who was a Crowley posse member and the major force behind the creation of NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Once again, we dove deep into all that in Renegade Files episode 54, Occult Magic and Modern Science. Be sure to go back and listen to that one on your next road trip. Or if you already have and liked it, you can share it with your friends by sending them a link to therenegadefiles.com and suggesting they search for, once again, episode 54, Occult Magic and Modern Science. A banger. Sharing Renegade Files episodes you like that way is an easy and free way to help the show grow and thrive. The more listeners we get, the more support we get on Patreon, so then I can keep making these episodes for you. And thank you to the fine folks who are RFA agents on Patreon already. Cheers to you. You too can join them and get all the cool stuff they do at patreon.com/renegadefiles, or through links in the show notes and on our website. And you can just be a part of the community there. You get bonus episodes and hours of additional Renegade Files content. And remember to listen to the August Short Drives episodes, which are coming out now on Patreon as public posts that are free for everyone. The whole site's free for an entire week, too. So just go there and press play to hear them. These free episodes and more are yours for the taking at patreon.com/renegadefiles, and I can't wait to see you in there. So the Collins elite sets out to figure out exactly what's happening with the UFO and alien phenomenon. They discover that Crowley conjured Crowley, I don't know, how do you say it? I always like to say it the way that Ozzy Osbourne said it. Mr. Crowley, right? So, isn't that how he does it? I don't know. Rest in peace, Ozzy. So anyway, they discovered that Crowley conjured some interdimensional being demon, what Crowley believed to be a fallen angel. And this leads them to Jack Parsons. What the Collins elite finds out about Parsons is that on the day he died, in an explosion in his home laboratory. Remember, Parsons was a rebel rocket scientist, so he's performing some sort of occult ritual in his basement, trying to conjure some interdimensional beings, as apparently you do. He's following in the footsteps of his friend Crowley, and in the middle of it, he opens some kind of portal once again, and as he does, whatever technology he was pairing this ritual with malfunctions, and a huge explosion kills him. The Collins elite discovered that on this very day, the day that Parsons allegedly opened some portal and inadvertently blew himself up, that across the entire nation, there were multiple UFO sightings. hundreds reported to air traffic controllers, military bases, and local law enforcement agencies on the same day as Parsons' demise. So the Collins elite concludes that Parsons didn't die accidentally, but that he positioned himself to be physically destroyed at the moment of this occult ritual apex, when this interdimensional portal would open up, and thus he would allow these demonic fallen angels to harvest his soul so he could assist them in whatever nefarious work they were doing here on Earth. This is all dark art, spiritual war stuff. There's also a section in the book where people who were involved with all of this tell us that Jack Parsons knew Kenneth Arnold, who was the pilot who inadvertently coined the term flying saucer in 1947 after witnessing a fleet of UFOs while flying over Mount Rainier in Washington state. That sighting was in weeks of the crash at Roswell, and Parsons hinted that both of those events were actually descriptions of entities that came through some openings he and Crowley devotees had caused when they were trying to conjure spiritual beings for some change the world level spell they were doing called the Babylon Working. Crowley is an interesting character to say the least, and he was kind of a rich kid troublemaker, and he had a colorful life, and he's a full show subject all his own for sure. He spent the night in one of the deep chambers in the Great Pyramid at Cheops, and came out talking gibberish for a week after that, and then, based on whatever happened to him in there, he dictated a huge portion of one of his books to his girlfriend at the time, who must have been one of the most patient women in the world. We might dive into Crowley in an episode before the end of the year. The Collins elite also studied the works of John Dee and Edward Kelly. These were the English Renaissance occultists who developed the Enochian language, among other things. But one of their rituals resulted in them conjuring etheric clouds that appeared to be visions of the heavens, and within these clouds, scryer Edward Kelly said that he saw small beings looking back at him. Edward Kelly makes Aleister Crowley look like an altar boy. So anyway, the Collins elite believed that Edward Kelly's descriptions mirrored both Crowley's lamb demon and our modern alien greys. The Collins elite thought that they had connected an occult component that seemed to persist across centuries, that united the experiences of both ancient occult practices and modern-day UFO abductees and alien experiencers. After investigating numerous cases of alien abductions and UFO encounters, and by cross-referencing these experiences with a long list of historical, biblical, and spiritual traditions, as well as perennial legends, the Collins elite concluded that there is a demonic species of interdimensional creatures that are coming into and out of our realm and harvesting our souls. And not just for sustenance or as a source of energy for themselves, but for the deeper and more elaborate project of orchestrating an end-time event to usher into our universe an antichrist figure to rule over all of us. This brings us back to eschatology, so the study of demonic entities and their methods as related to the end of the world, and much of that concerns the biblical book of Revelations, which is dense to say the least. The big questions for biblical scholars are, in the book of Revelations, is Paul being literal? Is his book allegorical? Is it a method of making us think for ourselves? Or is this a real nuts and bolts, fire and brimstone prediction of volcanoes and comets and extinctions on a global scale that threatens our physical existence? Is it a mythical tale of caution against hedonism and satanic instant gratification? The fact is, we just don't know. The book of Revelations is, like the rest of the Bible, or any giant religious tome for that matter, open to vast and wide interpretations. Now, this leads us into the next part, which is Sergeant John Healy. Sergeant John Healy was a military man within the Collins elite framework. He says that the Pentagon would reach out to the group and conduct quick phone interviews after members had conducted field research into these demonic alien encounters. Sergeant John Healy says that some Pentagon official would call him up and ask if he had, prior to the field research, ever dreamt of an out-of-body experience. In one case, he had indeed had such a dream, and he described looking back upon his body and staring from above into his own eyes. His bodily eyes then opened, and he witnessed his own body begin to speak to him in a foreign language that he described as the clicking, buzzing language of an insect. I think you would agree that is a terrifying image. But this brings us to the language of necromancy in biblical antiquity. When the spies went into Canaan, and they tell of experiencing dead bodies that have become animated and are now possessed by some non-human consciousness, and that these entities, which they called Zamzumim, communicated between each other in a chirping, buzzing, muttering type of language. An unintelligible, insect-like language that sounded identical to that witnessed in the out-of-body experience of Sergeant John Healy, and that the Pentagon officials seemed to have prior knowledge of. And just to make the connection further, in the book of Isaiah, when Yahweh instructs Israel and warns them not to consult necromancers, he specifically says, "Do not consult those who chirp, buzz, and mutter." This is a reference not to the necromancer, but to the demonic possessing entities that inhabit the soulless corpses, the biblical zombies, as they were. Much of this again comes from scholar Nathaniel J. Gillis. So back to Sergeant Healy. The Pentagon officials seemed to know that he had had this dream. This gets into the whole weaponization of remote viewing and astral projection, and these technologies that are said to be able to implant thoughts or manufacture dreams in individuals. Nightmare scenarios, right? This also connects to the story of a woman named Tammy Stone, who was, according to her descriptions, abducted from her car by aliens. She's driving along at night about 30 minutes away from getting home, around 11 p.m. after visiting some friends, I think, and ahead of her car and just above the road, about a mile away, she sees a bright light. At first, she thought it was the bright lights of a semi-truck, but then realizes it's something in the air. She thinks it must be a helicopter because it's not moving, so it's hovering. And as she approaches it, she sees that it's a glowing disc-shaped saucer. Her car stalls, so we get that whole thing. She gets lifted from her body into what she calls a living organic spacecraft and feels as if her soul is being extracted from her consciousness. The entire experience only lasts about 15 minutes. Then she finds herself back in her parked car in her driveway at home, and it's like 4 a.m. So she has experienced missing time of about 4 hours. She's in shock and trying to process it all. She ends up finally going to sleep later, gets up the next day, and as she's doing her morning routine of coffee and gearing up for the day, she's wondering if she dreamt the whole thing or if she was fully abducted by aliens, and then she gets a knock on the door. She answers it, and guess who? That's right, the classic Men in Black. And they ask her if she had had a dream that she was abducted by a UFO. This obviously freaks her out because she's still in shock from it all. And now she has to cope with this idea that somehow these guys from some non-specific government agency, according to her, have some kind of information or knowledge about what she is either dreaming or experiencing, and she has a very rough time of it afterwards, trying to figure out if this was something orchestrated by them in some way, and it's all a big mental mess. Now, there is also one more possibility here. Well, there's many, but one possibility is the only evidence we have for this happening at all is the testimony from Tammy Stone herself. No one saw her get abducted from the car into the UFO. No one was with her when the MIBs visited. She didn't bring back any artifact from the spacecraft or have any implants, as it were. So it's possible, alien implants, let's just say. So it's possible that she imagined or fabricated the whole story, Men in Black included. Which brings us to the summary. Nick Redfern's book is thorough and presents the facts as relayed to him from witnesses, and as such, it does a great job of explaining this esoteric theory that the UFO and alien phenomenon is an even deeper mystery resulting from interdimensional demons intent on deceiving humans, harvesting their souls, and taking over the world, whatever that means exactly. What do they do with the souls? I don't know. The point is that the accounts and descriptions of the activities pursued by the Collins elite are mostly, if not entirely, intellectual gymnastics, whereby a false correlation or illusory correlation is generated when two possibly unrelated events are mistakenly believed to be causally related. So Aleister Crowley performs some elaborate hallucinatory deep dive into his self-admittedly twisted subconscious, and upon awaking draws a picture of a dark angel who came to him in this trance, tells us its name was Lamb, and then sometime later theologians working with the CIA find that drawing, and because the face of Lamb drawn by Crowley looks like the head of an alien that visited a woman in her dreams, then all aliens and UFOs must be demons? Now, there are several movements within the broader UFO and alien researcher community that lean away from the physical extraterrestrial hypothesis, and new ideas are a good thing and well worth exploring, especially on subjects where definitive answers continually evade us. Some of these are things like aliens are us from the future, aliens are interdimensional beings slipping into and out of our perception, they're manifestations of our collective consciousness, and as such form a sort of perennial experience where the current times cast them in different roles. Ancient men saw gods, medieval Christians saw angels, and the modern tech-fascinated see technologically superior spacemen. So, send a group of religious scholars into the CIA and the Department of Defense to investigate alien abductions and UFO sightings, and they see demons and fallen angels putting our souls at hazard. As for me personally, when talking about the UFO and alien phenomenon as a whole, I tend to be an old-school purist. I think there must be extraterrestrial life because I studied astronomy in school and have an appreciation for the incomprehensible vastness of the universe. The entire universe seems to be alive, and as such is probably teeming with intelligent life of incomprehensible variety and possibility. Yet the distances involved are so staggering that what we're seeing is just the fringes of who knows what. And any deep discussion of extraterrestrial life always leads us back to the truth expressed by that little kid in the back seat trying to put his own seatbelt on. Worry about yourself. Remember that? But it's true. We spend over 1,000% more on weapons and war than we spend on education and healthcare. We kill each other over religions that we invented, and oil. And electric cars won't stop that. You don't think we'd go to war over lithium deposits to make electric car batteries? We already do. And it's our warmongering which seeds in us the biological fear of extraterrestrials. We're afraid they might be as violent as the worst of us. My belief is that they are not just as violent as us, but also as kind and loving as us. In other words, as complex as us. Human life becomes tribalistic because of our sets and settings, our likenesses and divisions and resources. If we were all pure pacifists, some group would arise to take our mangoes and steal our daughters. And sometimes there really are barbarians at the gate. But human nature is nature nonetheless, and nature always strives toward balance. The more complex an ecosystem, the more in balance the constituent parts. If any one system grows disproportionately at the expense of others, then its natural deficiencies arise to weaken it. Outside forces conspire to curtail it, and the affected individualists disengage to avoid it. Our attempts to understand the UFO and alien phenomenon are many things. But one thing our opinions on the subject almost certainly become are the projections of our own hopes and fears about ourselves. Are the aliens violent? Are they peaceful? Are they here to help or harm us? Are they demons or saviors? Are they cosmic gardeners tending their terrarium Earth? Or are they us, raising their children into cosmic consciousness, watching us as we fight over our toys and bulldoze our trees to sell more houses to ourselves? When they land on the White House lawn, who will emerge? Angels? Demons? Rock stars? Or Rastas? My hope is that they will be reasonable, that they will be wise enough to try to understand who we are and why we do the things we do, both mad and brilliant, and that we will be wise enough to try to understand the same things about them. It's a big hope, I know, but it's a big universe. And it seems to make nothing but miracles for light years in every direction. Thank you so much for investigating the Collins elite, aliens, demons, and the deep state spiritual war with me. Subscribe or follow this show now, so together we can meet here next time and explore the deepest covert stories where logic clashes with the official narratives. I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. Join the Renegade Files agency on Patreon for bonus episodes, to be a part of the coolest community of weirdos online, and to help me keep making this show for you. Until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, offbeat child. Holy crap, I did it. Holy crap, I did it.